She had been told to wait outside the command tent. No explanation, no timing, just a quiet dismissal that kept her standing in the heat while decisions were made without her. She wasn't listed on the manifest, her name didn't appear in the rotation, and for the third day in a row, no one made eye contact when the flight brief began. Her ghillie shroud was rolled halfway down her shoulders, revealing a modular combat top streaked with dust. Her chest rig was clean, but well worn, a kestrel wind meter hanging from one of the front loops. Inside the tent, Lieutenant Jason Walker stood at the front, flanked by a NATO liaison officer and a visiting British major. He outlined patrol intervals and sector movement orders. Samara's name appeared once on the monitor, listed under Overwatch Alpha, with no assigned team, passive channel, zero control integration. When Walker called for preliminary questions, one of the infantry corporals gave a short laugh. He tapped the screen and muttered, "What's with the analog tags on Alpha Post? You guys still using paper to dial wind up there?" The remark earned a few quiet chuckles. But just before sunset, a new set of boots crossed the tarmac. An officer whose voice carried weight without needing volume. Something shifted in the command posture. Screens were pulled, files reopened, and then everything changed. How would Samara, the last one on the ridge, the one everyone dismissed, spot the danger that even the most advanced tech and experienced patrols missed? And how could one silent shot from a hidden woman change the fate of an entire mission, proving that sometimes the unseen vision is the only one that truly matters? Samara didn't respond to the jeers. She adjusted the corner of her laminated dope card, filled with her sharp, small handwriting, angled drift notes, and pressure thresholds drawn from her own tests. Her math would hold without permission. She knew the wind, not from digital feeds, but from the way the leaves reacted, from how the mist slid like smoke. As the fog deepened, her scope began to pick up subtle contrasts. A flicker appeared where there should have been dull shadow, not a movement but an absence of light. Two limbs, slightly pried apart, revealed a narrow, arched glint that was just wrong. It was an active infrared trip module, strategically placed, a trap no one else had seen. They wouldn't believe her on the comms. They already had. But Samara didn't need their approval or their green light. Her finger hovered just off the safety. Because sometimes, the one who stands furthest back sees what no one else can. And in the silence that followed, her aim was about to speak for itself. Samara arrived 10 minutes before the briefing. Her boots tracked fine red dirt across the gravel edge of the tent compound as mist settled low across the perimeter wire. The lights inside the main operations tent were already on, a muted yellow behind canvas. She adjusted the strap of her scope bag and moved quietly across the crushed stone path, bypassing the groups gathering in loose circles outside. Most wore plate carriers unbuckled, steaming mugs in gloved hands, their postures relaxed. Someone nodded in her direction without saying anything. She didn't return it. She wasn't part of their rhythm. Inside, the room buzzed with clipped chatter and the rustle of maps. Folding chairs scraped against the plywood floor. Screens flickered above a weathered planning table, showing layered grids, humidity overlays, and sector identifiers. Battery-powered lanterns hung from tent poles. A pot of black coffee steamed next to a box of protein bars. Already picked over, Samara took her seat without a sound. Her ghillie shroud was rolled halfway down her shoulders, revealing a modular combat top streaked with dust. Her chest rig was clean, but well worn, a kestrel wind meter hanging from one of the front loops. She unsnapped a slim binder from her thigh pocket and opened it flat across her lap. Inside was a laminated dope card, annotated in black and red. Her handwriting was sharp and small, with angled drift notes and pressure thresholds drawn from her own tests. First Lieutenant Jason Walker stood at the front, flanked by a NATO liaison officer from the French detachment and a visiting British major. His voice was clear, efficient, and focused on delivery. His rank tabs were crisp, his sleeves rolled once, and his eyes tracked the pacing of the slides behind him. He outlined patrol intervals, sector movement orders, and fallback grid signals. Recon assignments scrolled across the right monitor. Samara's name appeared once, listed under Overwatch Alpha, with no assigned team, passive channel, zero control integration. When Walker called for preliminary questions, one of the infantry corporals leaned forward and gave a short laugh. He tapped the screen and said, "What's with the analog tags on Alpha Post? You guys still using paper to dial wind up there?" The remark earned a few quiet chuckles from the edge of the table. Someone sipped coffee to hide a smile. Samara didn't respond. She adjusted the corner of her laminated card and flipped to the next page. Her notes were detailed: wind layers, fog distortion over mixed tree cover, correction angles for slope drop across the ridge band. She didn't need to defend it. The math would hold without permission. She raised her voice once, just enough to be heard. "Sir, wind drift at elevation is holding over 100 or recommend pushing Overwatch Bravo to a higher backline if we expect to hold sightline integrity during the middle loop." Walker didn't look at her directly. He gestured toward the screen instead and replied with polite detachment. "Well, we'll keep it simple today. Staff Sergeant, you've got Alpha Ridge 31 passive scan. The rest of the sweep is locked. Stick to what's issued." Samara nodded once. She didn't press. The French officer didn't look up. The major gave the faintest shake of his head. Unreadable on the screen, the patrol formation finished cycling. Their name remained gray, unlabeled. Outside, the wind pushed gently across the tents, carrying the scent of damp fuel and pine. Samara stood and packed her binder carefully. She passed behind a cluster of team leads, who didn't shift to let her through. One of them, a tall sergeant from the motor pool, muttered something under his breath as she passed. Another voice replied in amusement, "She'll still be zeroing in while the rest of us are on extract." The comment didn't sting. It was too familiar to land at the gear. She pulled on her field gloves and clipped the scope bag tighter across her back. The rifle wasn't visible, just the outline of the case under canvas. Her ghillie shroud hung loose over one shoulder. She paused at the edge of the prep zone to confirm her sector grid and frequency band. Victor 23 elevation hold. Her channel would be listen only. The patrol net was already crowded. No one wanted static from the ridge. The sun hadn't cleared the trees yet, but light was shifting. Boots scuffed against concrete as the patrol squads began their final checks. Walker gave a last round of commands over the radio. His tone was crisp, direct, confident. Samara stepped out without comment, past the rows of humming power units and idle vehicles. Her boots hit the trail firm and even, dirt brushing the edge of her gaiters. She moved uphill alone. Not slow, not hurried, just steady. A figure stepped aside near the range gate, but didn't speak. By the time the forward elements crossed the valley line, Samara was already 100 feet up the slope, counting distance by breath and stride. Her rangefinder bounced once against her ribcage, steady in its case. The weight felt right. Her eyes scanned the fog curling along the treetops. She didn't need confirmation. She didn't need to be called on. Her job was not to be seen. Her job was to see, and she would do that as always, without needing the room to agree. Mist drifted low through the trees, shifting in long horizontal curls as if drawn by hand. The ridge sloped gently down from the east, just steep enough to break the wind, but not enough to block the view. Samara moved without hurry. She unrolled her rifle mat and set it flush against a stone ledge that had weathered flat at the edges. The same one she had marked on her training overlay 3 weeks earlier. The fog gave the surface a slick sheen, but her hands were steady. She cleared it with a cloth tucked into the side pocket of her vest. Her pack came open without sound. The rifle, a matte black M2010 with a custom suppressor and precision bipod, slid free with practiced care. She laid it parallel to the edge, then opened her field map beside it. The paper had long since softened from wear. Her own notes were scribbled across the grid in neat, consistent strokes. Wind gaps, thermal pockets, echo shadows from previous live fire sims. She clipped it in place against a small rock and waited at the corner with her kestrels. Samara adjusted the bipod angle until it rested cleanly. She didn't glance up when the wind kicked through the trees. Instead, she waited. When it stilled again, she reached for the bolt and chambered one round with a firm, single motion. The safety remained on. Her eyes tracked movement through the brush. Not for threats, but for how the leaves reacted. High mist tended to fall in pulses across the canopy. Today it slid like smoke, staying low, indicating shallow wind pockets rather than turbulent lift. That was good. Stable drift was easier to work with. She glanced once at her dope card, then traced a faint annotation on the top margin, 32 in drop at 500 meters. Fogband confirmed it was something she had tested during a mock insertion 2 months earlier, logged with her initials and time-stamped in the corner. No one else had asked for the data. It didn't matter. She brought it anyway. Down below, the forward patrol was already pushing into the midline valley. Their positions flashed in and out on her passive channel. Small call-outs were half-cut by terrain and relay lag. She listened but didn't transmit. Her link was one-way by design. She was not meant to be a factor in the comms net. She was an asset, not a participant. Someone made a joke over the channel. The words were clipped, low quality, probably meant to be private. She's not even on the net. Why even post her? The response wasn't sharp, just amused. Insurance in case we need a weather vane. The laughter that followed was brief but audible. Samara said nothing. Her breathing didn't change. She fine-tuned her scope next. Loopfold glass, 20 by magnification, weather-sealed and flawless. The view turned crisp by degrees as she adjusted the ring. Trees resolved into branches. Leaves separated into layers. Every meter of visible ground became a measured frame. She scanned left to right, then back again, sector by sector, grid by grid. Slow, intentional. A branch near the 10-hour position had dropped more leaves than the others. She stared at it for 6 seconds, counted the rate of movement, and noted the root angle. Nothing odd, just saturation from overnight fog. Still, she checked again before moving on. One bird call echoed once, then cut short. Samara tilted her head slightly, but didn't shift position. She let the silence re-establish itself, waited 5 full seconds, then resumed scanning. Nothing moved. The rangefinder stayed clipped to her harness. She rested a gloved hand against the toggle, but didn't activate it. The last thing she wanted was a visible ping in the low valley. Everything she needed could be read through holdover and drift math: distance by relation, angles by height. Samara trusted her notes. They had never failed her. The fog deepened as the sun rose higher behind the overcast. Light shifted without brightening. Her scope began to pick up more contrast as shadows darkened the moss between trees. She logged a mental correction. The upper ridge to the left now had 2 heat-reflective branches that didn't belong. They were part of a drill zone from last week and no longer relevant. She noted the change and cleared them from her search priority. Her stomach had settled. Her posture was stable. Her legs braced wide behind the mat, not touching loose rock. Even her breathing had dropped into rhythm, slow enough that her reticle barely drifted on exhale. She turned one last page in her logbook. This one had a faint smear across the corner from where her glove had pressed into wet paper on a previous op. She smoothed it gently, then returned to the glass. Atavian something, a shimmer where there should have been dull shadow. She stopped. Nothing followed. No second shift. No pattern of approach. She adjusted her scope by 0.3 mils to compensate for the morning's variable drift and waited. Samara kept her breath shallow as the wind shifted against the top layer of brush, watching through the scope as a sliver of light caught something that did not belong. It wasn't movement, it was absence, light where there should have been shade. The trees framed the gap perfectly, 2 limbs just slightly pried apart. From most angles it would have looked like an old broken branch, but at this angle, with the sun pushing against the fog, a glint arced across one line in the field. Narrow, arched, wrong. She did not speak, not yet. She shifted her scope 3 degrees and took another reading from her mental chart, rangefinder untouched. She confirmed the background. No heat source, no motion, no birds within 10 meters. Her kestrel read gusting variable between 3 and 5, just under threshold. The pressure had held stable for almost 10 minutes. If there was a time to shoot, it was now. Through the glass, the filament sharpened. Infrared triggers sometimes used dual post mounts, camouflaged cylinders hidden behind bark or wedged into brush, invisible unless you knew the composite casing's sheen. She had studied that exact module in a training manual 2 years ago. No one else had logged the correction angle under this specific canopy. Her finger hovered just off the safety. Still on, still calm. She inhaled once, felt the pressure settle in her shoulders, and adjusted her mills by 0.7 left. Elevation drop read -0. Her dope card, still folded at the corner, had a red notation in the margin from a rain test she ran the month prior. It matched wind drift within expected deviation. She flipped her radio selector to channel 3, the patrol frequency. Overwatch Alpha to element Bravo. Hold movement. Visual anomaly at vector 25 degrees. Upper tree layer. The reply came back fast. A different voice, slightly clipped. Say again. Overwatch did not copy last. Repeat. Did not copy. Samara repeated, adjusting her tone. Hold movement. Potential sensor wire crossing. 25 degrees. The silence lasted 4 seconds, then another voice. That sector's clear. Sweep confirmed by 2 prior units. Overwatch. Check lens alignment. Her thumb hovered over the radio switch again. She considered repeating the call. She considered asking for a redirect. But the patrol was moving. They would be beneath the wire in under 40 seconds. Her scope steadied. The filament shimmered again. A bird landed 2 feet away from the post and startled off without singing. Samara exhaled once. Deep, measured. She flipped the safety off. Her left hand adjusted the rear bag to compensate for terrain slope. Her cheek weld settled naturally into place. The angle was sharp. The shot would need to shear through fog and tree haze at a steep downward incline. 1 click held. She breathed in, held. The wind paused. She pressed the trigger. The suppressor thumped like a dull clap in water. No echo. No secondary fire. No flash. Just the soft recoil and the smooth lift of the bolt handle under her palm. Her scope didn't move. The filament snapped. Not from stress, but from her round. A slender piece of synthetic wire, nearly translucent, fluttered as it separated. The branch that had masked the top anchor rocked slightly. From that branch a single casing fell, metal dimpled, rigged with a blackened dome. It caught on a twig, then spun slowly before dropping out of view. Down in the valley the patrol halted. One of them stepped forward, then called out. His voice was partially muffled by echo. Command, we've got unknown sensor housing. IR trip module, old style, he said. At chest height, another voice came through, louder now. Confirm visual. We've got gear hanging in sector 25. Housing cracked. Repeat, housing is cracked. 1 second of radio silence passed. Then another. The patrol net shifted frequencies. Was that us? Unknown. Could be pressure triggered. Could be paired. Who fired? Another voice came on. Lower. No one down here. Shot came from the ridge. Samara didn't move. Her finger remained alongside the trigger guard. Her bolt was still half lifted. She hadn't blinked. Her dope card remained on the mat, notes visible. She waited for someone to ask. They didn't, not yet. Her radio chirped once on channel 1. The command frequency. She tapped once to acknowledge, but didn't speak. Down below, 2 soldiers formed a perimeter while one crouched under the tree. His helmet cam streamed back to the control tent. The feed showed a split metal housing with wires protruding. The piece she'd struck now hung useless, just above where the lead scout's shoulder would have passed. Samara watched them work, methodical now. The jokes were gone. The fog held steady. The wind changed direction. She reset the safety, lifted the bolt and caught the casing before it could drop to stone. 1 clean movement, and the shot landed where no one else had even looked. The cracked housing was half buried in wet leaves. The IR lens was still intact, but the casing was split clean down the side. It rocked gently under the scout's glove as he lifted it from the debris, careful not to disturb the wire fragments still caught against the base of the anchor post. The faint smell of adhesive and scorched plastic lingered. One of the patrol lights shone across the casing. The reflection came back unnaturally smooth. Too clean to be an old drill component, too deliberate to be overlooked. The call came in low and clipped across the patrol net. Forward element confirmed visual on an infrared trigger housing. NATO shell stripped markings. Live link to a pressure element. There was no training tag, no dummy seal. This wasn't an artifact from a range. It had been planted with intention. First Lieutenant Walker answered after a brief pause. His voice, usually assertive, now carried a quiet edge. That was an active tripwire. I repeat, confirmed IR-linked trigger. In the operations tent, Major Evelyn Thorne stopped mid-brief. He had been reviewing a logistics board when the call came through. The background chatter faded. He turned to the main monitor. One of the live feeds, still running from a helmet cam, now showed a tangle of foliage at shoulder height. A narrow shimmer crossed between two trees. The casing dangled from a thread of snapped fiber, swaying slightly with the wind. He tapped his stylus once on the table, then looked to the tech operator. Show me the ridge shot. Last outbound round on record. The tech moved without hesitation across the room. A few heads turned, but no one spoke. The heating unit ticked as it cycled. A comms panel hummed near the rear wall. Otherwise, it was still. The screen buffered, then opened a file labeled Overwatch Alpha. A scope feed appeared. The resolution wasn't high, but it was enough. The view tracked slowly across fog-thick trees. A faint haze curved along the upper limb. Samara's reticle held center as the angle shifted. One breath passed, then the shimmer or flicker of light against a narrow thread. Her reticle twitched right, one final hold. Then the strike. The wire snapped clean. Casing rocked, and silence resumed. Thorne watched without expression. Who took the shot? Staff Sergeant Samara. The tech said. One suppressed round. Log 1219. No comms confirmation sent. Passive entry only. He paused, then added, her grid placement shows she was outside the cleared sector. 2 grids off. Another operator confirmed. Elevation Delta 100. She wasn't supposed to be watching that line. Walker came back over the comms net. Voice steadier now but slow. That placement wasn't in the sector brief. We had no trap signatures. It was clean on our sweep. There was a pause. Then a voice from the far console, quiet, matter of fact. She saw it anyway. No one replied. Thorne folded his arms and turned back to the footage. The scout on the ground had begun marking the device for collection. Metadata in the corner tagged it as intercepted. The overlay classified the shot as successful, neutralized without detonation. The British liaison officer shifted forward in his seat. He didn't speak. His eyes tracked the replay. The French observer tapped his pen once against his knee and continued writing. The log team reviewed Samara's dope card annotation. Wind drift correction had been entered at 0.7 left. Elevation hold at 0.3. A margin note from her previous range test was still legible. Initial no request for confirmation. It had been entered 5 minutes before the round was fired. Shot was pre-mapped, one of the analysts said. Calculated blind, no adjustment after confirmation. Just the correction angle and a call. She transmitted a hold, another added. No request for fire, no demand for green light. Just a quiet visual alert. They dismissed it. Walker didn't deny it. His channel stayed open, but he said nothing further. Any other firings recorded within 5 km? Thorne asked. None, came the reply. She was the only outbound round at that time. All other shooters accounted. No misfires, no ambient suppressor tags. Thorne nodded once, still facing the screen. The fog moved through the treetops again. The shimmer, the correction, the shot, the playback ended. No one reset it. No one had to. Across the room, a second display showed Samara's call sign in active status. Her role had shifted from standby to live log, not manually, not by edit. The system had updated based on recorded input and sector adjustment. One of the logistics officers leaned back in his chair and said, almost under his breath, that wasn't in the brief. A voice near the back answered him, not mocking, just even. No, but she saw it anyway. The tech looped the shot once more. The rhythm was slower this time. One breath, One squeeze, one correction line, rendered visible by a gust of wind and a trained eye. No one said her name. They didn't need to. The silence that settled was not confusion. It was recalibration, a room full of people reconsidering what they thought they knew and how close they had come to missing it. Samara hadn't taken the shot for approval. She hadn't taken it for glory. She had taken it because it needed to be taken, because someone had to see what others had missed. The device was now bagged and tagged. The logbook confirmed. The ridge image still hovered on the screen. Scope focused, nothing dramatic, just the aftermath of something prevented. In another setting, this would be the moment for medals or declarations. But in this room, it was enough that they all knew. She had seen it first. She had seen it when no one else even looked. Samara stepped through the outer flap of the operations tent, her boots leaving damp marks on the floor, rifle bag over her shoulder, and face unreadable. The light inside had shifted. Amber from the overhead consoles glowed against the muted gray of dusk. Lanterns hung low along the frame of the tent, casting soft halos across maps and cables. Conversations stopped when she entered. Not all at once, but gradually, like a room exhaling. Voices trailed off mid-sentence. A pen clicked once, then didn't again. Someone lowered their coffee without drinking. She moved without hesitation. The ghillie across her shoulders was soaked. The fabric darkened and weighted with mist. Her pants bore streaks of brown up the calves. The dry dust from morning had turned to clay. Her gloves were clipped to her belt, scuffed from gravel. She crossed the floor in even strides, not rushing, not pausing. When she reached the debrief table, she set her logbook down without a sound. The cover was damp but intact. Mud pressed into the lower corners. The black marker across the top still showed her initials. Is, faint but unmistakable. No one reached for it. She didn't wait. Across the tent, First Lieutenant Jason Walker looked up. His expression didn't change. He didn't speak, but his eyes tracked her movement with a focus he hadn't shown earlier that day. And when she glanced back, just briefly, he held that look without deflecting. Samara gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and turned away from the table. She crossed to the side bench near the equipment lockers. Her rifle bag came off her shoulder in a single motion, set down with quiet precision. The strap was tucked underneath. The weight shifted evenly. It was the way she had placed it every time, though no one had noticed before. Major Evelyn Thorne stood near the primary console, one hand resting on the edge of the screen, the other still on his stylus. The scope cam footage played again. He hadn't asked for it this time. One of the operators had restarted it on their own. The clip ran silently, a reticle steady in the fog, one breath cycle, a flicker in the trees. Then the shot, clean. No hesitation, just motion. Then stillness. The data log confirmed the timestamp. One round fired at 12:19. Passive channel, 0 signal artifacts, 0 error margin. Thorne didn't ask who fired. He didn't need to. Still, he asked quietly, as if to confirm what everyone already knew. Was that shot logged? The analyst at the second station answered without turning around. Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Samara. Overwatch Alpha. Round confirmed. There was no follow-up, no explanation offered, none required. Thorne nodded once, then turned back to the screen. Not a kill, he said. His eyes lingered on the footage as the sensor housing rocked in slow motion and dropped out of view. A save. No one contradicted him. Samara removed her scope from the bag. The lens was still wrapped in fog netting. She unfastened it and wiped the glass with a clean cloth from her outer pouch. The arc of her hand was smooth, consistent. One pass, then a second. She inspected it, satisfied, then wrapped it again and sealed the bag. No wasted motion, every step just as it had been practiced. One of the junior comms officers across the room said it softly, as if to no one in particular. She was last on the ridge. A pause followed. Then another voice replied from behind a terminal. The tone was flat. Not praise, just fact, but the first to see it. No one laughed. Someone returned her dope card. The same one she had annotated that morning. 0.7 drift left. 0.3 elevation. The margin note from her previous range test was still legible. Ink slightly blurred, but hold it. She tucked it back into her binder without comment. On the secondary table, beside a small evidence tag board, sat the snapped IR sensor housing sealed in a clear bag, tagged by time, location, and sector grid. No one pointed it out, but each person who passed glanced toward it, not because it was dramatic, but because they now understood what it had meant. Samara stayed seated for 15 minutes. She adjusted nothing. She didn't check the screen again. She let her body rest in stillness, not slouched, but steady. She listened to the quiet around her, not tense anymore, not dismissive, just altered, grounded. Then she stood, gathered her gear, and buckled the bag across her shoulder. No one stepped in front of her, no one gave orders. She didn't pause for direction. She made her way to the entrance flap, pausing only when the breeze outside shifted the canvas and lit the far edge of the room with sunset color. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see the monitors one last time. The final frame of the ridge still showed on the screen. Fog curling, reticle still, the broken line in the trees. No one followed her out. No one needed to. The silence that followed was not the same as that morning. It wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of wait. She didn't wait for another debrief. She didn't wait for someone to say her name. She didn't need to. They knew it now. She was last on the ridge, but the first to see it. Sometimes the one who stands furthest back sees what no one else can. Samara wasn't loud, and she wasn't first to speak, but she was precise. She was present. She watched carefully, acted deliberately, and never once asked to be noticed. Her strength came not from rank or attention, but from a deep-rooted clarity of what mattered and when to move. In a world that often celebrates volume over vision, she reminded us that stillness has power, and that you don't need to be seen to make a difference. Her one shot did not bring her praise. It brought a pause, a realization. The moment others looked back and understood they had been protected by someone they almost didn't count. If that quiet strength spoke to you, share your thoughts below. And if you want more stories like this, stories of resolve, respect, and earned recognition, stay with us. There's more to come.